All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I know it's not my meeting, but I did want to say hello. I do hope you're safe and healthy and enjoying what there is of summer. It's a little strange one. As you probably know, I know you know, at the last board meeting I recommended and our board approved beginning the school year 100% online. And as you can imagine, it was not a popular decision, and about 70% of our parents wanted their children to be face-to-face in school this fall. But I stand by that decision. I'm so happy our board supported it. It keeps you safe and keeps our students safe, and that's first. That said, obviously virtual and remote instruction has to be extraordinary. Our parents want that, you want that, I want that, our students need that. So knowing you, of course, there's no doubt you'll deliver on that. I do want to thank you for your continued dedication to every child, every day, and I want you to know I do appreciate you. And with that, I will mute myself and hand this off to Dr. Lons.
Thank you, Mr. Gutman. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Mrs. Koyansky and I are very excited to have an opportunity to speak with our middle school teams of teachers. I just want to frame it out in the sense that we've worked really hard with our teachers over the last really 2 months, but specifically last couple days through negotiations to come up with some agreements that we've been able to formalize in a letter of understanding, an LOU. Now, there's still a process that has to go through. We know that there are going to be changes as we move through this. And that's really the part that I want to talk about for a moment, is that this is the first time that we've all lived through this type of teaching in this type of a pandemic. And so we've been able to put a lot of information out there, but we know that what we know today might look a little bit different than what we know 2 or 3 or 4 days or even 2 or 3 or 4 hours from now. And so we will continue to work collaboratively with our association, with our teachers, and with all of groups of our employees to make sure that we can continue to pivot as we need to and make those adjustments as we need to. One example of that is the Bell schedule. So when we put out the Return to Learn, there was one Bell schedule that was published there, which at the time was really good thinking and what we were hoping to do. And now we have a different Bell schedule, and we'll be publishing that very soon. And so we know information is going to continue to change. And with that, I recommend that later today or tomorrow or soon, we'll be sending out an FAQ link. And in that link, that will have always the most updated information, because we know today we won't be able to get to all of the questions that were submitted in advance. So what we've tried to do today is pick out the questions that we think, let's say we have 110 people, that apply to most 110 people. Now, of course, you have questions that are individual to you. And what we decided is very difficult for us to answer those individual questions for one person while the other 109 are sitting there listening to it going, this is a great question, but it really doesn't apply to me. So please continue to submit those questions even now, because Dr. Delgado is reviewing the questions as they come in, and we may be able to get to some of those bigger questions that perhaps weren't submitted already. But either way, in our FAQ, we will address questions as they continue to come in or have come in, so that you will have the most updated information. Mrs. Koyansky, I take it off from here to talk about our curriculum and instruction.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Lons. If you'll give us just a minute while we work to get our technology up, Mrs. Sobel's going to be screen sharing a presentation. One of the things that I know you've all been reaching out about is, tell me more about this remote learning plan and how was this chosen? What was some of the rationale? Why are we at where we're at? So I'm going to be able to go through that. I'll kind of talk you through the Our Path, My Path versions of our online learning to start the school year, and ways that we can support you. Just like Mr. Gutman said, if any staff can do it, it's the staff here in Walled Lake. You know, we pivoted quickly this spring. We did a fantastic job. Sometimes it didn't feel like it, but we really, really did. And I want you to know that we listen to feedback. We listen to feedback from all of you. We listen to feedback from our parents, and we took all of that into account as we rolled into our June and July planning. So you're going to get a little peek behind the scenes as to what's been going on. How are we working behind the scenes to support all of you? And I just want to let you know that as an instruction department, we're really there to support this, to support all of you and make this the most successful remote start that we could hope for our parents and for all of you too, and our students. So thanks, Mrs. Sobel. We're going to go ahead to our next slide. So I just, within my welcome today, I really wanted to send a special thank you to those of you who have worked on and continue to work on this plan. As you know, back in June, there were a number of volunteers that said, you know, I want to be part of some of this committee work and some of this planning. And it was really a pretty arduous task. We were really following a moving target, if you will. You know, the situation in June isn't the situation that we find ourselves in now. No one has a crystal ball. You know, things are always changing. If you think about that, an analogy to sailing, right? If you've ever been on a sailboat, you know, winds blow in different directions. You have to be ready to work as a team to, you know, raise a sail, lower a sail, pull in the ropes, let those out, tack. All of those things are important when you're sailing, and I kind of feel like the work that we've been doing this summer in preparation for returning to school this fall has really been a lot like that. It's been needing to be pivoting and responding as it's ever changing, and it seems like every day or every week we find out new information or learn something new or get new guidance. So with that in mind, thank you to those of you who are part of the middle school team who have volunteered your time this summer working on committees. I know that there's a number of you out there who were also part of the instruction planning committee, the subcommittee that's been really kind of refining and tuning this, this remote plan. And then also to members of your teams who are working on curriculum planning right now. So for a number of weeks, we've had curriculum teams working on getting ready in the content areas, helping you so that you have access to online lessons, pacing, resources. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I want you to just know that those people that have done that work over the last several weeks and continue to work on that have really shouldered a big responsibility, right? I've, as a teacher, you know, for many years worked with a number of grade level teams and department teams, and you really do need to kind of rely on your partners, right? I know that we each have our own unique style of teaching and our own unique way of delivering, you know, our lessons, but really the people that have been working on this content planning have stepped up to take a big responsibility. So I want you to have some patience with them. I want you to have some grace. I also want you to thank them, because it's a pretty nervous feeling to know that you might be part of a team of 5 or 6 that are planning for, you know, an entire, you know, launch with a department or a content area. So please be thankful to them. Please work with them. Please, you know, give them some grace and know that this is a flexible start. We're all just trying to support one another during this time. So as you know, when things are easy, we don't grow. But when things are challenging and we face those challenges, we grow exponentially. And I just want you to know that I know that this team, already highly effective, has even grown more so given the challenges that we're facing. And we'll continue to do that and support one another. So just to kind of talk about this, the agenda for what we're covering today, I'm going to jump right into talking about the 2 learning options, the remote and the virtual. We're calling it RPath, remote, which follows our school schedule, our Bell schedule. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we selected a remote learning plan, as well as why we're offering this virtual option called MyPath. We'll talk about the rationale behind selecting that. We're also going to cover the instructional planning that's taking place and the support that we're providing to you as you get ready to begin your year. I know that Dr. Lons wants to cover some things about that Bell schedule. He did allude to that topic when we started the meeting. He's also going to talk about when staff may be interested in applying for the MyPath or the virtual assignment with the Edgenuity curriculum. We'll talk more about that process. And then I also want to cover with you what's next. What's next regarding PD? How will we be supporting all of you to have a successful launch to this school year? And then, as Dr. Delgado said, we're monitoring that Q&A. Many of you have been submitting excellent questions. We want to make sure we cover those, especially those bigger ones that apply to many of us, the ones that have been asked multiple times. we will ensure that today during our time together, we get to those and we answer those for you. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the support for remote teaching. Why was this selected? I know that there have been questions that many of you have been sending me, many teachers, K-12, talking about, you know, why are we using our curriculum? Why are we transitioning to this daily schedule? Well, we really did take a look at that feedback last spring. What went well, right? What didn't go so well? We heard from a number of families that said in the springtime, hey, what you guys are doing, we appreciate, we know you're working so hard, but it's not enough. We also heard from families saying, hey, we appreciate what you guys are doing, but this is way too much. And that's even just with what we were putting together last spring, right? As kind of our experiment in distance learning. So we know we needed to be really, really intentional. So the discussions that took place this summer with the task force and then the subcommittee on instructional planning, we really talked about that need for consistency in learning experiences, that we wanted to design a plan that whether children were in person, because remember, we were planning for that in-person return, as well as a remote option for families who weren't ready to return to us. So with those two choices, we didn't want to have apples and oranges. It's really, you know, we want to place in your hands your ability to do what you do best as a teacher, and that's deliver the curriculum. If we were to come up with some different type of a model or something different that we together as a whole system were implementing, it really would have created a real inequity. And we know that systems like this already lend themselves to inequity. So we wanted to be really careful about that. So that consistency of learning experiences in either setting and the outcomes that we wanted for kids, those were what led us into choosing a remote plan. What that means is that our path follows our school schedule. It allows our teachers to do what they do best, and that's teach this curriculum that we use. So the instructional materials are familiar to you, they're aligned. And we know that the pacing and the unit endpoints are really, really critical. What we found ourselves in last spring when we abruptly halted and had to shift to distance learning was that we went, oh gosh, I'm not yet into that unit. You guys were into that unit? Yeah, I'm not. So when we as a system tried to support that shift to distance learning, we had people all over the place. So we know that pacing is important. We want you to be able to respond to the needs of your classroom, and we get that. We don't anticipate lockstep, but we do know that we need to keep our pacing as tight as we can. So that's been really intentionally designed into the curriculum planning that's taking place this summer. We also know that we needed our teachers to be able to collaborate. So think about that in-person virtual option. Those were the two choices when we created the plan. We knew we didn't want to leave teachers out in the dust where they weren't able to collaborate. So we know that in a remote setting and an in-person setting, we needed the opportunity for teachers to collaborate and plan together. We also wanted an ease of transition. If we set up a completely different on its own standalone system for remote learning, and then there was the chances for in-person needing to shift to remote, if it was set up in two different ways, that would have made it very difficult, and it would have made it inequitable. It would have been, you know, teachers and kids and families going, well, okay, what are we doing now? When am I joining in? If we kept it similar to our school day and how we roll with that, then there's a nice ease of transition in those times when we're moving between in-person and remote. So remember, we're postponing our return to in-person, right? We're starting 100% online, but our goal is we want to be able to get back to in-person learning when it's safe, when it's allowable, when we know it's the right time to do that. So that's the other need for a remote plan that follows our school day. Now, is it a hefty weight on students and families? Well, we've tried to lessen that in terms of looking at it through a block schedule lens. So we're not looking at, you know, many classes a day. We're looking at it as a reduced amount of classes per day for kids to manage. But Yes, we know, and this is what we've been hearing as Mr. Gutman talked about, you know, it's an unpopular choice, it's a safe choice, but it's an unpopular choice in that parents are saying, oh, this is going to be, you know, a bit on us as a family. We recognize that and we know that, but we know that with your expertise and your collaboration with your families, you'll be able to help this along. And you're going to be able to do that great teaching that you always do in person as well, just shifted to remote. So that unit and lesson planning is underway. I'll be sharing some overviews of what that looks like with you as well. Dr. Lons, did you want to say anything else about the remote teaching model or the virtual teaching decision?
I believe we get to that a little bit later in the slide presentation. Thank you.
You bet. So I'm just going to refer you back to the information that was shared on Tuesday evening with regard to two different learning options that we were presenting to our community as well as to you. And that is the RPath option, which is just what we had outlined in the Return to Learn plan following our school schedule, as well as MyPath. One of the things we heard from families is, hey, we appreciate the robustness and the rigor of a daily school schedule, but you know, I work 12-hour shifts and there's nobody home monitoring my kids, and this is going to be really difficult for us to handle. I wish there were a way that we could access something asynchronously or on our own at our own time. To be honest, you know, Mrs. Kowansky, we're going to have to look at a homeschool option. You know, we're ordering workbooks, we're looking at that. I heard that from many, many, many families, and it got to the point where it became a question of, are we willing to have those families leave to go do that, right? Because, you know, those asynchronous on your own MyPath type models are out there. They've been out there for many years. And, you know, frankly, our parents love what we do. They love in person, but we know that, you know, when it comes down to a daily schedule, some might need that opportunity. So it begged us to consider, do we offer that opportunity to our families so that they can have that flexibility while still maintaining contact with our district, contact with our expert Walled Lake staff, and the ability for us to be able to monitor what those kids and students are learning, so that when they come back to us, we've at least had a paper trail, if you will, or a trail about their learning. We know what they've been doing, we know what they've been experiencing, and we're ready to welcome them back into in-person learning. Knowing that while MyPath might not exactly line up, it covers our standards, but hey, some of those families were probably going to make that decision anyway, and then we wouldn't have had oversight with those students. We wouldn't have maintained contact with their families. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that rationale between offering the MyPath. And if you're looking for some additional descriptions of those, please refer to the chart that was included in the Tuesday evening communication, because it does kind of a side-by-side comparison for you so that you can get a little bit more familiar with the differences. So Mrs. Sobel, you can go past the elementary slides. I believe there are just a few. So we talked about that proposed middle school block schedule, as Dr. Lons mentioned. Obviously, the bell times and things, this is just a sample. We know that there will be additional tweaks and changes to this that will be shared. But really what we're looking at is teaching in a block fashion, so that obviously students are more focused on a reduced number of classes per day. And it really allows for flexibility. I know that at the elementary level, our teaching staff was a little bit concerned about, oh my gosh, is a student like on the computer from 9 to 4? You know, for a 6-year-old, that doesn't seem feasible. Well, sure, it's not. They're in person with us for that amount of time in our classrooms, in our buildings. But when you think about remote, if you look at the format of the class, that's where I want to draw your attention to in the middle of this chart. You'll see it says begin with synchronous. just like when your kids come into your classroom, you're beginning with that, here's my intro lesson, right? So that 5-10 minute intro lesson is how you would start welcoming your class. So that's not different than what our kids do in class with you. And then there's independent work time. So off you go, guys. You know what you're, I just shared this with you. Hey, you might do a breakout session with a couple of students that you know need a little bit of extra support. Students might pair up. Students might work independently. So it's not 100% screen time during that block. We do want you to welcome your kids back at the end. Everybody join back in at 10 o'clock. We're going to do a wrap up of our learning today. Who'd like to share? So just like you would in your classrooms, it should feel natural to you, but it's just going to be done remotely. So there is going to be that give and take between synchronous and asynchronous time, kids joining in, kids working on their own. So I wanted to kind of at least paint that picture for you. We do expect kids to have active participation throughout the day. We know we're expecting a lot, but I'm going to be honest, we have to be able to count attendance for our students in order to be able to maintain counting our kids. So that's different from what we were experiencing in the spring. So just know that these expectations should outline what that looks like. And through PD, when I get to talking about PD topics, you'll see how we'll be able to help you envision this and help you kind of walk through that sort of day in the life of a middle school teacher, as well as day in the life of a middle school student. We'll help you see it from both sides. So I wanted to talk about those curriculum planning teams that have been working for weeks now on this. One of the charges that they've been asked to kind of carry and take up is really looking at what are the essential standards that we want to be teaching for these first few months as we return, and how can we highlight those into here's your essentials that you're covering, and here are some options that you can choose. So in elementary, we're calling them must-dos and may-dos. In this unit planner, this is just a sample of a middle school math planning unit. You'll see at the top is listed the priority standards that have been identified by that planning team, your colleagues, your peers. Remember, you got to thank them. They picked up this work and they're working on behalf of all of you and the teams. And then you'll see how to set up your online classroom. Here's your links. Here's the things you need. It's right there for you. And this will be housed in a Google Drive so that you can access this. You'll notice on the left side of that column down below where it says new learning plan, it's going to list your lessons and your priority things that you're covering. Notice the middle says follow up to new learning, making a connection with past content. And then how can I enrich or review? What are some extra things that I can do? So in a sense, you're getting similar to what elementary is getting. Here's your essentials. Here's how you can support. Here's some extra resources in case you find that you need those. And so that's how that's going to be broken down for you. And it's really nicely laid out. I want to thank the curriculum team at ESC who's really come up with this template for planning, because it really makes a lot of sense and it will help us with that pacing and sequencing that's really going to be important when we talk about that time where we reach a point where we transition to in-person learning. Proposed high school follows very similar, Mrs. Silva. You can keep on going. So what's next? I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lons to talk a little bit about the MyPath piece and some of the next steps with regard to that.
Thank you, Ms. Kohansky. So as we've mentioned, we have our two choices for our families to choose from, the MyPath and the RPath. As Mrs. Kohansky talked about, we had a number of parents, and probably many reached out to you, giving a number of concerns, along with the districts around us, had an option for our parents to choose a MyPath style option. It's also important to know that having a virtual option isn't new. This has been around for over 15 years at companies and organizations like Michigan Virtual, K-12 online. Rather than having our parents go to what we would consider a lesser product because they're not our teachers instructing and using those products, we wanted to have something that our parents could choose from that would still be a Walled Lake mentor teacher. And we want to make sure that we keep our students with us so that as we eventually move out of this pandemic, they can transfer and shift back to our classrooms, because that's where we want everybody, right? We want everybody to be back in school. We want to be face-to-face. We want the interaction. It's just for this moment in time, we have to come up with this other option. Now, it doesn't mean this option will go away. It might be something that we keep for years, as some parents may transition into this and say, this is what's best for my child. My child really does learn best this way. So even though we're starting with the product of Edgenuity, it doesn't mean that that will be the product that we use forever moving forward. And we've agreed, and we think it's important to bring together a group of teachers to look at this product and then to look, how can we move forward differently as we either progress throughout this year or progress into new years. So this isn't our product forever, although it might end up being. What it is for today is the product that we're going to use because we're familiar with it. We've used it at the high school for years. I've used it personally when I was in the classroom and when I was a high school principal. And some middle school teachers and elementary teachers have had exposure to it, as we've used this for some of our advanced students to help move forward in their curriculum. So if this is something that a teacher would be interested in teaching in, they would fill out a Google Doc. I'll be sending out a link saying, here, please fill out this information, provide me some information that you are interested in teaching in the MyPath option. A couple things to talk about with the MyPath, which is different than the face-to-face option or currently the remote YourPath option, is in the MyPath option, the class sizes are very different because the expectations are very different. In MyPath, you're not creating content, you're not creating assessments. You're really that teacher that can help that student get unstuck. So they're stuck on something, whether it's they're stuck because they're waiting for their next test to be released to them or the next unit to be released to them, or whether they're stuck in that I just can't get this concept and I've tried everything this product has to offer. Can you please help me with this? So with that in mind, to the best of our ability, we are going to keep content teachers as the mentor teachers. So for our students that are taking our MyPath option for math, we will, to the best of our ability, have our math teachers be their mentor teachers, because that's what best practice says. And we want to do best practice whenever we can. So for our teachers teaching the MyPath option, you will have a maximum load of students of 250. Now that is significantly more than what you have in face-to-face, but again, the expectation is very different. You won't be correcting homework, you won't be preparing tests. Again, you're there to help someone get unstuck when they get stuck. And so this means the hours are also a little different. And typically in the face-to-face or in the RPath option, you're either going to be 100% ready to go and be available either 9 to 4 or 8 to 3, depending on your level. In this particular case, you're available from 9 in the morning until 9 at night. Now, I'm sure that gave some of you some pause and said, well, Mike, I'm not going to work 12 hours a day. Although I'd submit most of you are working 12 hours a day anyway, right? I mean, many of us are putting in long hours, and you were doing this 3 years ago or 10 years ago when you started too. The difference is that you're choosing your times within that 12 hour. So you might say, for my family, it's really easy for me to work from 8 until 10. But then my family gets up, we start to get going on things. I need a little bit of time from 10 to 11 to attend to my family's needs or whatever it may be. And so from 10 to 11, I may not be available to check my email or to reach out to a student individually. Conversely, remember, our parents are choosing this because they need that flexibility. And so they can't be available at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because they're working at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So they may not be getting home until 4 or 5, they have dinner. Then around 6, they're logging on with their child and they're saying, okay, what'd you do today? Or where are you at today? And they might say, okay, I need to take this test now. So they might email you at 7 o'clock at night and say, could you unlock this test? Now, we're hopeful that you'll be continuing to check your email throughout that time period. But again, we understand that there's things that come up in your life. You are not to be online 12 hours a day and be available 12 hours a day under this setting. Just like in the last 3 months of the school year last year, I know you had a hard time drawing lines with our families because we were sitting at home. You know, you were sitting at home working at your workstation, and then you went to the dinner table to have dinner. For me, that was the same table. So for me, it was very difficult for me to draw that line because I wasn't getting in the car and driving home, right? And so I encourage you, and you have our support, whether it's the My Path or the Our Path, you still have to have time for you and your family. You still have to have some times where you go, yep, I'm turning off the computer now because I'm going to spend time with my family, or I'm going to do something for me. This path or the other path is not, you have to work every day, all day long. What the My Path says is you just need to be more available in a wider period of time, because that's what our parents need, and that's what you're doing to accommodate your family needs. Is anyone going to say you need to turn in a timesheet to us to make sure you're working your 6 hours a day or 5.5? No, of course not. We trust that everyone is a professional and you're going to do the very best that you can. So please know that even though the time frame is extended, the hours that you should be working is still the same as the hours that we're expecting everybody else to be working. This is a commitment though, and it is a commitment that you will stay in this pathway unless we have a substantial change in our student population. So if we have students that when we go back to face-to-face that say, no, My Path was great, but I really would like to be back in school, then we'll start talking about how we move staff around at that point. But this is a commitment that everybody is making to the best of their ability, knowing that things come up. Just like for you, something might come up, for a student, something might come up too. So there is some flexibility built in there. And it is enrollment dependent. I don't know how many students we are going to have to choose this option. I can give you some wild guesses if you prefer, but they're just guesses. And so I can't guarantee that we'll have, if I'm being transparent, enough teachers say, yep, this makes sense to my family and myself, that this is what I want. I may have to call on some people that did not say this is what they want, so that we can still service the needs of our students. Because again, what we know is when a student leaves a district, it's harder to get them back to that district than it is to keep them in some type of program within the district. And we know this pandemic will end at some point. What we want to make sure is that we're ready to have those 13,300 students still be part of our family and part of our community. And that's what our parents ultimately want too. They don't want to go to Michigan Virtual, but if we don't have a product that gives that parent that flexibility, then they will. And so that's why it's important for us that we have this. Along with that, we know that most, as I mentioned, have not taught in this environment. Well, Edgenuity has very specific PD for the teachers that go into the My Path option to teach. And so we have PD that is developed by the company to help you function within that company's software. So know that we're not just saying, I think Catherine O'Brien's on here, good luck, do the best you can. We have a product and a system in place to help you be prepared for that. One question that I'll steal because I did see it on the pre-entered questions is, well, Mike, if I volunteer to go to My Path and you choose me, right? Because conversely, I could get more teachers asking for it than we do students, right? We already mentioned we don't know what that's going to look like. And you choose me, and I'll use Catherine again. Does that mean I can't go back to Banks then? Am I just out of Banks forever? And the answer is no. Just like a student who happens to leave Banks to go into the My Path, if they go back to face-to-face, they're going back to Banks. So with Catherine, I'm going to ask her, let's say we keep it for the whole year and let's say nothing changes, just for the sake of this conversation. In April, when we do our normal staffing, I would go to Catherine and say, Catherine, it looks like we have this system for next year. We'll have a My Path system for next year. Did you enjoy it and would you like to continue to do it? And she could say, yes, Mike, I'd like that. So then mark down, okay, Catherine would like to continue in this. If we have enough students, we'll continue with it. She may say, no, Mike, it was great for this year, but I'd really like to be back face-to-face teaching because that's what we're planning for. And I said, okay. So I will then put Catherine back on paper in the Banks staff. So when we're staffing out Banks for the 21-22 school year, Catherine will be one of the teachers that is listed in Banks as someone who could teach in that building for the 21-22 school year. Now, what we know though, is we know that just because let's go back to 1920 school year, You may have been at one school in 1920, and I may have had to move you to a different school because of student population changes, because of program changes. So it doesn't guarantee, just like you have no guarantee now, that you would continue in the building you're in for the rest of your career. What it guarantees is that you're part of that group of teachers as we start to make those decisions. So don't feel that you're giving up that building, because you will be put back into that group of people when we start to restaff again in May and April. Mrs. Kransky, I think I covered most of my path. Do you think I missed anything?
No, I think that was great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Lons. So obviously, I've been taking a look at the questions that you've been submitting, and as well as the questions that have been coming in over the last week or so. As you can imagine, we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions being sent. We've been doing our best to kind of field some of those, to kind of put some of those into today's session, to kind of plan for that. And we know that professional development is a hot topic. We took a look at the surveys that teachers filled out in June. We asked you to kind of give us your feedback. What went well, technology-wise? What things did you feel that you needed more help on or more training on? As you look forward to next year, if we start remote, what are some of your big priorities? What are your big concerns, your big worries? So all of that was taken into account by the planning teams this summer that have been meeting. As the task force, as well as the subcommittees, we've been taking a look at this. So this list is not completely, it's pretty comprehensive, but I've tried to put it in order somewhat of priority, because I want to talk a little bit about this rollout for in just a few short weeks. What are we going to need to be doing and doing well? As Mr. Gutman said, look, we're going to hit this and we're going to knock it out of the park. We're going to do really great with this. The first is Google Classroom as our learning management system. There was a lot of conversation early on in June. We were taking a look at, gosh, Google Classroom had its drawbacks, and we know that the way that we rolled things out in the spring, it sufficed, but it certainly didn't meet all of our needs. So we started to look at things like Canvas or Schoology or other platforms that are out there that we could purchase. And to be honest, the more we dug into it and the more we talked about it, the more we realized that, hey, anything remote that we do this fall, the more similar we can keep it, the less new for staff, for students, and for families, the easier that will roll out. So we decided to stay with Google Classroom, but I want to let you know that we are purchasing the Enhanced Enterprise Suite for Google Classroom, which comes with a ton more tools. So Google Classroom, we know, is a real priority for helping everyone feel comfortable, because with that, we are going to be asking our staff within that Enhanced Google Enterprise Suite to also use Google Meet as that primary two-way communication tool. Now, don't panic. I'm a creature of habit. I don't know about any of you. I've gotten so used to Zoom. I can Zoom with the best of them. I've been doing Zoom now all summer, as well as I know that many of you were using that with your classrooms. But there's some drawbacks to Zoom, and we know that. It's a separate two-way communication platform. Many times you were sending separate links and emails. Our student Chromebooks weren't working very well with Zoom. Kids couldn't see the gallery view. They weren't able to view all the participants. So there were drawbacks. So knowing that we were going to purchase this Enhanced Enterprise Suite, we feel really confident, and I feel really confident. I've used Google Meet, so I can tell you that if you were pretty good with Zoom, it'll be a pretty easy transition over to using Google Meet, and we will help you get ready and help you feel confident with that when we come back and do some PD together in a few more weeks. We also know that many people are concerned about social and emotional well-being. So the second and third bullet somewhat go hand in hand. How do we launch this? Do we just start with curriculum on day one? Well, research tells us that's probably not a good idea to do. We really need to focus on building our classroom communities. Our kids have been giving us feedback that they want that. I had a chance to do a student forum with representatives from the 3 high schools as we talked a few weeks ago about the Return to Learn plan, and they gave feedback on this social emotional component. Kids need time. to be able to chat, to be able to talk, to be able to explore, and talk with each other just like they would in a normal classroom before class begins. So those same kinds of things, we want to help you to launch your remote classrooms so that if I'm the parent of a 4th grader, a 7th grader, and a 9th grader, I'm pretty sure that my teachers are all launching those remote classrooms in a similar fashion, obviously with your own unique way, your own unique personality and style. But we're going to walk you through what those first days of school should look like and how to set you up for success with your remote classrooms. We also know that creating that classroom community lends itself to social and emotional well-being. I looked at some of the questions coming in. People are wondering, how am I going to get social emotional resources? Do I have to create those? The answer is no. We have a planning team of some of our social workers and folks from special services who have been working diligently over the last few weeks. They've been building a resource hub, not only for our families, but for teachers to access. There will be grade level activities, things that you can easily grab and use to help build that classroom community during your block time, to focus on SEL, and to make sure we're taking care of our kids and ourselves. So I want you to know that that will be built into professional development also. Next is highly important. I kind of gave you a quick overview, a snapshot of what the curriculum planning teams are doing. Obviously, they are working to make sure that you have access when they are ready to give it to you. So they're still planning, they're still working. You know, we're not going to hold on to that until the 26th and then share it with you. We know that some of you are planners, you want to see it ahead of time. I'll assure you that as soon as those curriculum teams are ready to release those units for you to dig into, we'll make sure you get the links to those. But we know in PD, you're going to want to dig in more, and you're going to want to talk with those folks and your colleagues that have been planning. So they will be planning to dig in with you, to share with you the units and those pacing guides. So we know that that will be important for you to feel comfortable that after you've launched and you start to get into the curriculum, it's available and you've had your questions answered. We also talked about the importance for you to be able to feel like what it's like to walk through that sample lesson from a teacher perspective, as well as on the student end, the user end of it. So we're going to set up PD that helps you to envision that. If you're like me, I'm a visual learner. If someone shows me how to do something, I go, oh, I can do that. So we're gonna set those opportunities up for you so that you feel confident and that you know what it should look like. We're also excited to share that with the enhanced Google Enterprise, we are working diligently. It's not ready yet, but we're working on it, on allowing Skyward and Google Classroom to sync up. So we're working in the IT department on making that happen. So that is part of our plans, and we will be covering that at PD as well. And lastly, tech tools for remote learning. One of the things that we learned through the feedback surveys in June is that everybody was playing around with a little something, and some things were more popular than others. Amy Stazak has been just an invaluable resource, I know, to our middle school teams. She continues to be. We will be continuing to share tech tools with you. Some of them will be embedded right in those weekly planning guides that our curriculum teams are working on. Some may say, here's a great online resource that you can use in kind of some of those optional enrichment type areas. But you might want to be like, and maybe this is a passion for you, you're like, hey, I'm ready to explore some things on my own that I would like to use. So we'll make sure that we have opportunities for you to explore additional tech tools and resources. And we're, in the process of making sure that we're able to purchase some of those things. There were some tools that were free in the spring that are a cost right now. And we're working to ensure that we can offer a lot of those for you. So those will be rolled out in PD later this month as well. So I just kind of wanted to cover what those big hot topics were to let you know we've listened to you, we've heard from you. Your colleagues that have been planning behind the scenes for the last few months are well aware. We know we need to launch this well, we need to launch it successfully, so we have a great plan to support you and to make sure that you're ready to go on August 31st. So lastly, this brings us to the last part of our meeting, and that is that you've submitted some really excellent questions. Obviously, some of them may have been answered during the presentation today, but I know that Dr. Delgado has been working behind the scenes here, compiling, as people have been sending those. And just to reiterate, you know, there's 133 of us on the chat right now. We're going to try and hit those big questions that apply to broad segments of us. And when you have some of those smaller, maybe unique to one or two people type questions, we still will address those, but those will be in an FAQ document that Dr. Lons will send you an updated link to within the next day or so, that you can continue to get that, that information and your questions answered. So with that, Dr. Delgado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. If you want to start to take a look at some of those big questions, we'll work to answer them.
Sure. Thank you, Mrs. Kohansky, and thank you everybody for attending this afternoon. So we do have several questions. I'll start right away. One of the questions, should our in-virtual schedule match our in-school schedule? A follow-up is, this could mean, could a teacher have both in-person and virtual classes? And I think what they mean is both in-person in terms of the hour path and my path when you look at a full schedule. So that, if I captured that correctly.
Thank you, Dr. Delgado. The short answer is it's possible. Know that our goal will be to keep people either teaching in the my path or the our path as much as we can.
And I think part of the follow-up to that question is that the hope would be that, you know, obviously, ideally, if you have the same class online, that when we come back to in person, that we would have those same students. And obviously that would be our goal, but it would be contingent on staffing and scheduling readjustments. Second question, or another question that's a broad theme that several people had questions about this. Will there be a limit of how many times a student can switch between the plans being our path and the my path? I'm concerned that it will wreak havoc with class sizes and student learning with the two plans and students going back and forth.
I'll jump in. Yeah, we're concerned about that too. So I don't know that we want a hard and fast limit with all children. We want to take a look at what the individual situation is. But if we see someone's jumping back and forth, it's time to have a conversation with the family about best educational placement.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mr. Gutman. I would just like to add that we know that there could be cases where there are health needs with a student or with family that might prompt that switch. So that's why the flexibility is there, but I would agree with Mr. Gutman that we would need to be really careful and watchful over those and maybe look at those on an individual basis.
And related to that question, there was a follow-up question about, you know, the alignment of curriculum between Edgenuity courses and then our curriculum. And we've used Edgenuity for years. It is aligned to not only the Common Core standards, but our Michigan standards. And so the pacing will be important, but it won't be, we won't be able to guarantee pacing if students are self-paced. But to the extent that we're looking in, we're monitoring that. Our teachers and our administrators are monitoring those families for that pacing. You know, that might minimize any kind of challenge when they're switching back and forth, but certainly we'll try to limit that to the extent that we can. Another question that came up several times, in the event that we need a day off or we have a sick day that we can't teach, what will be the protocol for instruction?
Thank you, Dr. Delgado. It's the same as if we were in the normal school setting, as you would report that absence. Now, the difference is that we no longer have the ASOP reporting system. We have a new system called Red Rover, and we will be providing information on that. It's very similar, but we believe we'll be more responsive and more up to date to our current needs. What we can't do, though, is we just can't have a sign up for the day that says, no education today because I'm sick, right? Just like if you were sick, you wouldn't have that sign up on the outside of your door and your kids walk into the building and go, well, I guess I don't have school today. So we'll have substitutes available to the best of our ability, just like we did for the last year. We had subs at the best of our ability. We know that even in the best of times, we can't always fill all of the needs. So we might have to be creative from time to time about where kids can go during those periods of time. And we're working with teachers and with our administrators to come up with a plan B, so to speak. But our first plan A is to have a substitute available. So you just have to enter that absence.
Thank you. I love the spirit of this next question, and we've heard this at several groups as well as with our PTA breakfast. Are we able to meet face-to-face with a small group of students if tutoring or other instruction is needed? And then a follow-up, perhaps just 5 kids at a time? We just love the sentiment of that and the spirit of that, but I'll let Mr. Gutman, Mrs. Kohansky maybe answer that.
Yeah, we absolutely love the sentiment of that too. And we really have to continue to talk about it. Like, I know there are so many of you who want to sit there and say, like, it's when you start the school year and haven't met your students yet, it's not the same as leaving in March and knowing them. At the same time, some people aren't able to meet with students either because of health concerns or just discomfort during this pandemic. So what we don't want is, you know, let's say you're teaching the same students as someone else and you meet with them and others don't. Now parents are questioning whether there's a lot there, as you can tell. So give us some time to talk about that one. We certainly would love to have you have an opportunity, if you want to meet with your students. At the same time, we don't want to create more issues by doing that. So we're going to put that on our list to talk about.
It's on everyone's mind, and it's actually on my principals meeting agenda for tomorrow, because so many of our principals want to talk about maybe ways to create that sense of community to start the school year in a safe and distanced manner. So more to come on that. Next question, will grades from the Google Classroom be automatically synced with Skyward to reduce the number of clicks we'll be required to do each day? I'll let Mrs. Kohansky deliver this good news.
Yeah, we're working on it. Yes, so much to everyone's relief, we are working on that sync between Google Classroom and Skyward so that it will reduce the amount of clicking and entering. So yay, Google Enterprise.
That was a huge challenge, to say the least, last spring. And so we're happy that we were able to have the company work with us. I'm sorry if I missed this, Dr. Lons, in your presentation or Mrs. Kohansky, but questions about, will staff be able to access their buildings on an as-needed basis before we reopen in November? Can we teach from our classroom? Those kind of things.
Thank you, Dr. Delgado. And the answer is yes. Your classroom will be open and available to you if you choose to do so. Just know that that's based on where we are today. If we get different direction from our health department or through an executive order, we'll have to make some different decisions. But we absolutely want to give you that opportunity if that's something that you'd like to do.
Okay. Another question, and this goes to the schedule that we're proposing. Why did we move to the teaching of 6 classes in a block schedule format, and won't this reduce staffing?
Sure, and that's something that we've had a lot of conversation about, and there's many good reasons why you should switch to a block schedule. There's academic reasons and learning reasons why you should do that. There's also, in this particular situation, safety reasons to do that. It reduces the number of passing time, and it also helps us create cohorts when that's possible. Now, whoever submitted that question must know a little bit about scheduling, because you're right, when you go from teaching 5 of 6 classes to 6 of 6 classes, in theory, you would reduce staff because you wouldn't need as much staff to teach all of the students. What we've committed to is that that is not going to happen. Let's say you currently have a total of 150 students that you are going to see in your 5 classes for a day. Under teaching 6 of 6 over 2 days, you'll still see approximately 150 students. Some will go up a little bit, some will go down a little bit just because of how numbers fall out, but in no way is the district looking to decrease staffing in the RPath model. The point of going to this was for educational and safety reasons, not for staffing reasons and not for a economic saving. Now with that, I just want to go a little bit deeper in the sense that we know, as we talked about, some bell schedules have been published, and the FAQ will have the most up-to-date bell schedule. And that is for middle school, you start your teaching at approximately 8 o'clock, 8:05. Again, we'll get you that exact number. And you will end your day at approximately 2 o'clock. And then from 2 until 3, everyone will have a common time to get together virtually, but you'll have that common time to get together. We just ask that as you're meeting, as you're prepping, as you're doing what you need to do to get ready for the next day, just make sure if any student has a really important or critical email that they send you, that you can try to get to that during that time. And I won't go into all the reasons as to why we want that to happen, besides that's just good practice and what we would do anyway for our students. But that is, we think, a great opportunity to carve out that hour time for people to get together and to have that time available, especially as we're moving into the new style of teaching. Thank you, Dr. Delgado.
Thank you. Lots of questions. This next question, several of you asked a question related to this topic. Will we be permitted to create course packets or packets like we had in college rather than handing out daily copies? And many of you asking, even proposing options for how we could get copies, and could we do a distribution and a drop-off packets every couple of weeks? So several questions about, can we make course packets?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, Dr. Delgado. As you know, the curriculum planning teams have really been intentional about when they're rolling out those lessons and the materials that are being used. We're trying to stay away from the need to copy. But with that said, we do recognize that students will need to have their hands on specific resources that they'll need at home. Remember back in March when we abruptly stopped and had to shift to a distance learning model, we ended up with like, oh, I wish the kids could get their textbooks, or oh, I wish they could have, grab a writing journal, or oh, I wish they could have had that. And because we were in quarantine and we were under a stay-at-home order, we weren't able to allow that to happen. But given the phase of reopening that we're in, we are looking at and planning for right now, and I'll be covering this with principals tomorrow at Dr. Delgado's meetings, we're going to be talking about a system for materials pickup for students. How can we do that safely? How can we look at what supplies they'll need for at-home learning? Because we know that put a lot of kids at a disadvantage in the springtime. They didn't have access to materials that they needed. We know that we can be more intentional about planning for that and setting up for a system. So we're working on that right now, and we'll be communicating that to you. So yes, we intend that we'll be able to get materials to kids. We don't anticipate you'll need to run tons and tons of copies of packets. That's our hope, is that we're going to look at what the curriculum planning teams have done to kind of set you up for success with what you need to teach. But we know kids need things at home too. So we are working on that system.
Thank you, Mrs. Kohansky. And actually you answered the next, maybe 3 or 4 questions were all about materials pickup. And so, for our band and orchestra, for students who have instruments, are we going to have a materials pickup and curbside pickup for your instruments? And, if we do the packets and some of the other materials that they might need. So that takes care of that. That helps that. A question, will the SNAPS class still be happening, but virtually? And I know this is a very specific question, but it brings up a broader theme about special education support and the class offerings that we have. I can tell you that we are actively working with Ms. Nikki Moore, our Director of Special Education, and her team. We have a special education parent meeting next Monday, I believe it is. And there was another question on whether or not we're going to be there. Absolutely. The similar presentation as today, we're going to replicate those with our parent meetings, but we are going to try to offer as many of the traditional classes, SNAPs included if we can, as possible. And then, think of the concept of an IEP, of an individualized educational plan. We are analyzing our caseloads as we speak. Our supervisors and teachers are looking at what the individual needs and flexibility within schedules, and the challenges for virtual learning will be everything from speech pathology to OTPT. We have our SXI classrooms. What does that look like with medically compromised children? So we are actively working on it, and more information to come on that. So thank you for that question, whoever submitted that. Another question, I don't know if we have the direct answer to this right now, but we're working on it. Are the free breakfast and lunches still going to be offered to our students? I know Mr. Chatfield, our Director of Operations, and Mrs. Fortner, our food supervisor, we're working on this, but do any other cabinet members have an update on that?
I do. Well, our initial notification was that we will still provide meals for all students who receive virtual education. I believe last year was what, 14 meals at a time we provided. We haven't received more direction than that, but there is an expectation, and actually I'm comforted that we'll provide that for kids. Last year it was not based on free and reduced lunch count. It's all students and not even from our own district. So we'll see if that's still the case. We're still waiting for some more guidance from MDE.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Gutman. And really kind of one of the last broad themes, I know that we've reached our time limit and we need some time to review the Q&A for the high school meeting, but we've really tried to do a nice job of hitting the big themes. But one of the final themes were several questions about social emotional learning. In the original plan, there was time for SEL lessons. Is this something the district will guide us through, or do we need to create the lessons? How will we deliver SEL, whether it's a formal curriculum or informally support our students and their social emotional needs? I know that Mrs. Kohansky can probably speak to that, but just remind everyone, in the 3 pillars of our committee work over the last 2 months, one of the key pillars was a social emotional learning committee that was headed up by, led by Heather Wiley, who is our special education supervisor. And so that committee, which some of you may have even served on, came up with several ideas and may be able to deliver some of the information. So Mrs. Kohansky, can you share a little bit more?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Delgado. So I kind of touched on this topic during the presentation. We are going to have a resource hub for teachers to be able to access grade level specific and topic specific SEL lessons that you can roll into and use during your block classes. So obviously you'll want to be, planning for how you do that, maybe within your grade level teams, things like that. But I know that Mrs. Wiley and her team have been working on collecting resources, not just for our families, for their at-home needs, but for all of you for actual lessons with your kids. So know that we'll be rolling that out as well. That will be part of PD. I touched on the building classroom community and SEL piece. So we will be sharing those resources with you and where they're at and how to access those. And it will all be part of that. How do I launch a successful classroom community online? So thanks, Dr. Delgado.
Thank you. And there are a few other questions that are more individualized, just to highlight them. Some questions from counselors about, their caseloads. Will they have both My Path and Our Path kids? Yes, that's likely. Also from special education, in terms of your caseload, how is that going to work? We're working on that. A few other questions that came in after we started the session about BAs and assessment. And maybe Mrs. Kohansky, you can speak to that a little bit. I know there's obviously concern about cheating and screenshots and plagiarism and having, other people in the room helping you with assessments. So
Right.
Can you just, maybe we'll end on that broad theme of assessment because it's on people's minds.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So from the standpoint of iReady, I want you to know that we are preparing. We've had meetings already with the iReady representatives at Curriculum Associates. Obviously, they're working with a number of districts in the same boat as us. They're an iReady district. How do we do the diagnostic? How do we do that from home? How do we assure that there's validity to that? And they've really developed a nice kind of how-to video. It's meant to share with parents as well. Really, the difficulty with teaching in a remote setting is we have to somewhat relinquish our concerns and kind of go with a little bit of an honor code. That's why under that student expectations piece, and this is something that I think maybe our students didn't think a lot about last spring, was that piece about academic integrity. It's still important, even in a remote setting. Will we be able to keep track of all of that? No, we're gonna do our very best, but we need kids and our families to know that we're gonna be cognizant and we're gonna be watching for that. We still expect our students to do their own best work. And part of that launch and part of that setup of your classroom community is going to be covering some of those topics. I'm gonna talk to parents about it at the parent information sessions. And with regard to iReady, let's say a parent does help a student. well, obviously the lessons are going to be too hard, and iReady is going to have to adjust back to what that student's level is. So just know that there's a little bit of fail-safe built in terms of iReady, but as far as those assessments go and things like that, we're going to really press the importance of academic integrity, not just with our students, but with our families and our parents as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Kohansky. And I think part of that question was about if we're still going to continue district BAs.
Yeah, so that's part of the curriculum planning pieces. I don't know if any of the I-team that's on the Zoom call right now who've been working with the curriculum planners, have you guys talked a little bit about the BAs, and if any of you have information that you can share a little bit more, because I know I've been aware of the planning, I haven't been involved in the planning.
I can speak for social studies and social studies and ELA. Social studies, that is a concern because they're all multiple choice for the BA. They're in the meeting that we had, though, we did talk about the expectation that they still need to happen, but we have not figured out how to do that in a way that is going to provide authentic results. So we're going to have to talk about that. And middle school, I think ELA is in the same. We're going to need to talk about it. Their writing is a little bit different, but anything that has to do with any kind of multiple choice is something that we will need to discuss.
In science and math, we plan to use the benchmark assessments, but they'll be modified in a way that can be delivered and managed through Illuminate, and likely shortened in length.
Illuminate does have that option for timing and scrambling and doing some different things. So that's something we'll talk about.
Great, thank you. As all of you can see, obviously, it's a global pandemic. In my 26 years in education, I don't think I've had to make it through a more challenging or difficult point in education. I'm sure you guys can all see, but we've got the best people behind this work. We've got the best minds behind it, and obviously such a highly effective and well-trained staff. Our parents, you know, are so supportive of our school community. They're supportive of you. And I just wanted to share that. So yes, as we're still working through some of those details, please provide patience, please provide grace, and thank you for that as we continue to work on this and work through some of these challenges.
Okay, I'm all set with the questions. Again, we will do a frequently asked questions document. We will update that. You can always contact your individual administrator. You can contact any of us, and we'll try to get back to you individually, but we really appreciate your time. And
Dr. Delgado, I want to just jump in for 1 second before we end.
Yep.
And I just want to tell all of you, whatever you can do to ignore the teacher bashing, please do so. Teaching's hard work. Remote teaching doesn't make your life easier. So you have to ignore all of them. They don't get what you do. We have your backs. We know you have our kids' backs. So teach them up. Go get them. We got you.